Welcome to Illuminating Catholics, podcast of the Diocese of Sioux City. I'm Dawn Prosser, Director of Communications for the Diocese. Together with Carmen Bauer of the Faith Formation Office, we will shed light upon topics of faith in the modern church. Our guests include Catholic clergy, religious sisters, and other experts in their fields to help us understand what's happening in the church today. We will explore issues, even the tough ones, and to find answers to common questions about Catholicism. Thank you for joining us for today's Illuminating Catholics, shedding light to understand the modern church. Welcome back to Illuminating Catholics. I am Dawn Prosser. I am the Director of Communications for the Diocese of Sioux City.
And I am Carmen Bauer. I am the Director of Faith Formation for the Diocese.
We're so happy that you've joined us again today for our latest podcast. We're so happy to have so many new subscribers, and we welcome you. And be sure to follow us each week so you can be enlightened about topics about the faith here on Illuminating Catholics. One of our favorite podcasts is, of course, Outcast Catholic, with our host right from the diocese, Father Shane Deman and Father Travis Crotty. They launched that podcast in July of 2020. I remember being very excited about that. However, these priests wear multiple hats, figuratively. Father Shane is vice-rector at Kenrick-Glennon Seminary near St. Louis and serves as director of seminarians for our diocese. And Father Travis is director of vocations for our diocese and serves as chaplain for Bishop Heelan schools here in Sioux City and Briar University, also in Sioux City. And it's such a treat to have you here live and in person in our little studio to help dispel some myths about vocations for us. And so people can get to know you a little bit better. So welcome.
Yeah. Yes, welcome, Father Crotty and Father Shane.
Thank you. It's good to be with you.
We're so thrilled to have you here. Whenever we have a priest on our podcast, we always ask for introductions because even though it's hard for me to believe that there are people in the diocese who have not met either one of you, for as instrumental as you've been in your vocations, we just thought we would begin by asking you to share a little bit about your background and maybe a little bit about your call to the priesthood.
Sure. Thank you. I'm going to say this before I say anything else, Carmen. I've received some feedback about having a podcast in the past, and then when I found out that you also have a podcast, I was thrilled to collaborate in this ministry with you, so I'm happy to be here. I grew up in a tiny town in the middle of our diocese called Verina, Iowa. It's a town of 65 people, depending on who's gone to college or not at the time. Mm-hmm. I often say that my uncle was the mayor when I was in high school. My grandpa was the mayor before I was born, and I gave up the dream, and I went to seminary. And I don't know if I'll ever be the mayor. I don't think priests can hold public office.
I don't know.
No, we've tried that in this diocese. One actually has.
That's right.
And we shut that down.
I've heard. That doesn't happen anymore. So I grew up in this tiny town. Went to St. Columkille's Catholic Church in Verina. And I joined college seminary right out of high school. I went to Conception Seminary College in Northwest Missouri. I went to Denver to St. John Vianney for 1 year in seminary, and then I went to Kenrick-Glennon Seminary, Kenrick Seminary in St. Louis for 4 years. I was ordained in June of 2020, shortly before our podcast kicked off in the midst of COVID, which was interesting. And then I was assigned to Lamars at All Saints Parish and Galen Catholic for 2 years. I've been in Sioux City. This is my third year in Sioux City. Vocations story. I'll make it very brief. One time I gave it in 2 minutes in a classroom, so I'll make it faster than that, probably. I was always serving Mass when I was a kid. There was only like 3 families with children in my small town. So I was constantly serving Mass, invited to serve funerals, and I was close to the Mass and the liturgy of the church, which impacted me. I remember when I was a little kid, my great-grandma used to take me to the cemetery often to decorate the graves. Once I was 3, I think, with a croquet mallet, and I asked her why. I was just playing with this croquet mallet. I asked her why that man was on the cross, and she said, "Bad people put him there." I said, "Where are they? I'll find them." So the faith was important. My family was very close. Both sides of my family were Catholic. So that experience was helpful. I went to Catholic grade school, and it closed when I was in 5th grade, very, very small. I went to public high school, and the combination of both of having a foundation in the faith, but then being challenged in my faith by my non-Catholic friends was a helpful moment when I was in confirmation class. I was invited by my pastor to go to a Project Andrew dinner at the time, where different pastors invited young men from the diocese who might be open to or considering a vocation. And at that particular meeting, Father Brad Pelzel, our Vicar General now, who was vocation director at the time, he invited each priest to share one joy of their life as priests. And I was so impressed, especially by the older priests, the retired priests who just told their whole life story and probably set the whole event off schedule. But it was impressive because their lives were lives of joyful service in the diocese, and that sparked something amidst so much other things that happened, prayer that happened as I started meeting with the spiritual director and things like that, and then a long time of discernment in seminary helped me say yes to this vocation.
That's great. So I'm actually from Sioux City myself. We're recording here on Jackson Avenue with very windy conditions today.
Yeah, gale force winds, I think.
Yeah, there's like gale force winds up to 65 miles an hour. So if any of our listeners hear the wind blowing in the background, we're not trying to be dramatic. It's just the setting we're in. So yeah, I grew up right here in Sioux City at St. Michael's Parish, now merged with Blessed Sacrament as Holy Cross Parish. Went to Heelan High School, a third generation of a Heelan grad, and eventually went on to the University of St. Thomas and was ordained in 2008. It's nice that we're recording here back in Sioux City. It's good to be home for Christmas. As you mentioned, I'm in St. Louis, where you and Mark have visited often,
yes.
And it's always good to see you there, Dawn.
Good to see you, too.
But yeah, it's good to be back home in my roots, the place where my faith really came alive. And I've worked with Father with our seminarians now for many years, and it's good to collaborate with him and with our podcast as well.
Well, I was going to ask, as we mentioned, and as so many of our listeners know, you both host the Outcast Catholic podcast. What was the driving force behind deciding to start that? What was really placed on your hearts?
Well, Father Crotty was a little lonely during the COVID lockdown, and we thought we need to give him an extra project. Yeah, finishing grad school, it's probably in between classes. You're calling me from like 3 blocks away, but we never actually saw each other in person, and you said, "I have this idea."
Right.
Yeah.
So a number of people had encouraged me to start a podcast, and then when we went into the COVID pandemic, I had some extra time to research this and say, how feasible is this? And you've all lived this, having started your own podcast. Now, how do you actually distribute it? How do you get it uploaded? How do you record? How do you edit? How do you do all these things? So I had the time to actually do some of that recording, and Father was home from seminary, about to be ordained a priest. So we started brainstorming together. And then we started that summer. I think we started recording in July of 2020 and released our first episodes in August of 2020. And I think, Father, if I remember correctly, we were going after 3 different things. Mm-hmm. Those who, just feel like, I'm really trying to practice my faith and it's difficult. Maybe my parish is being merged, or maybe I don't feel like there's a lot of young adults in my parish. There's not a lot of young families. Where is it that I'm really finding nourishment in my faith and I just feel like an outcast? Even those who are, feeling like my parish is dying, but also even in urban areas, where do I just find support? Where does the Catholic culture speak again in my life if it's not more readily available? But then we also wanted to be open to that demographic that just thinks the church is as out to lunch and has got nothing to say to the contemporary world. And for all those people who think that the church is actually the outcast one and needs to catch up to contemporary society, we wanted to be able to speak to their level as well. And that third group, I think, that is sometimes in the middle, where some might be living a faithful Catholic life their whole life, and they kind of realize slowly that a lot of their friends have left the practice of the faith, or we're in the midst of COVID, and then it was true, especially afterwards. Those who maybe haven't even yet returned to Mass. Talk to a lot of people who say, I don't go to Mass now. Did you go before COVID? Oh yeah, of course, every week. So that where they might find themselves outcast in the midst of even a parish community or their friends that they kind of thought were their support in the faith. Right.
Well, as I've been out visiting parishes, it is very frequently that I hear great feedback about your podcast. It is, has a lot of different people have been drawn to it, both young and old. I know that while we were in Lamar's, Father Crotty, that I think 90-some-year-old woman, one of the sweethearts of the parish, was, I think, one of your most faithful listeners. Yes. And so I think everybody has been able to find a little bit of something in it that they're drawn to and has been found to be encouraging.
We first advertised it in the bulletins of the parishes, and I think I showed like a dozen people that the podcast app was already on their phone. The best thing it was ever called was an old gentleman in Lamar's who said, I heard on your outreach deal. Your outreach deal? It's an outreach deal, so we're still keeping
That's still accurate.
Deal. Yeah. It's a deal. We're outreaching to folks. Yeah.
That is great. I'm so pleased that you continue with that.
Yeah, it's been coming up on 4.5 years now, and
can't believe it.
We've been through ups and downs with when Father Shane moved to St. Louis, and then moving to doing it just online, and then all of a sudden the software we used for a long time just stopped working one day.
Right.
Going back and forth between different internet connections in town and my offices. But it's been good, and it's been wonderful when I've been able to travel around the diocese as well. Father Shane, you kind of keep some of the stats, and you see the different listeners we have. But when I get to meet people that are grateful for the ministry, it's difficult when you're doing any kind of digital ministry like this, where you don't know who it's reaching. And then when you get to meet somebody face to face and see that, it's wonderful. It's good to know that the diocese is built up for it.
Yeah.
We were pleased yesterday. We actually interviewed Deacon Jake Rosenmeyer about his thesis on Laudato Si and connection to agriculture, which actually will be dropped a couple weeks before this one.
Okay, great.
And he said that he binge listened to our podcast from St. Louis up to here. So I don't want you to feel bad that...
Yeah, I don't know if Deacon Jake binge listens to our podcast. I think he hears enough from both of us.
That was kind of what I was inferring, that
Yeah.
maybe he likes us better than you. And he
Probably.
did like the treats.
Probably.
So obviously the other hats that both of you wear is with Vocations. And Father Shane, how long were you Vocations Director?
7 years.
7 years. And then it's been 2 years you've been Director of
Two and a half.
Seminarians?
Yeah, 2.5 years doing the Director of Seminarians role from St. Louis at the seminary there.
Okay. So your plate is full.
Yeah.
Your plate is full.
Yeah.
And then Father Crotty was wet behind the ears, I think,
That's
ordained. Right. And so it's been 2.5 years then you have been Vocations Director. So because of that and the work that you do in fostering vocations and walking with people, discerning a vocation, we have a little series of mythbusters.
Okay.
Myths that
Here we
we
go.
have identified that you can clarify or substantiate these myths. So,
Sure.
okay, you ready for your first mythbuster?
What do you got?
Vocations. Fact or myth? A vocation only refers to men considering the priesthood.
For my job, absolutely fact. Everybody should be a priest now. No, that's a myth, and that's helpful to understand. And I think, unfortunately, what happens on the other side of that, when people try to kind of crack that myth, they make it sound like everything is a vocation, right? So obviously vocation is a call from God. And in some ways, everything is a vocation insofar as we're baptized, and what we're called to is a life of holiness. We're called to a life of communion with God in the church. That's what we're called to. How that's lived out then becomes this capital V vocation. There's different ways people live that out, but traditionally, marriage is this natural vocation we're kind of built for. And then the supernatural vocation of celibacy that takes concrete examples in religious life for both men and women and ordained priesthood. And then kind of the subset of that, we know that there's the permanent diaconate of married men who hear this call after marriage to ministry within the life of the church. I would say this, sometimes people say single life is a vocation, and I think that's where it gets we try to just include everything in a life of vocation. God calls us to specific ways of living in the life of the church, wherever we're at, right? Whether we're young and we're still in a period of discernment, or we found ourselves in a place in our life where we're serving those around us, whether we're married or not, whether we're ordained or not. But I think the main question for young people is, am I called to this natural state that I find myself in of marriage to pursue that? Or is there a supernatural call to celibacy like Jesus and with Jesus? Yeah.
Thank you, Father Travis. Ready for the next one?
Sure.
All right. Fact or myth? Only perfect men can discern to be a seminarian for the priesthood.
Well, without revealing the files of the seminarians, I'm going to have to say myth on this one. Okay. No, look at the apostles. Did Jesus go around and just recruit perfect men from Galilee? Well, there are no perfect men, except him as true God and true man. And the Lord uses our past. He uses all of our weaknesses. He uses the places that we've known grace has been healing us, restoring us, drawing us closer to him. He uses all of that to enrich our identity in knowing his love and generosity, but also how we can relate to others and walk with them on their own respective journey. There's times where a vocation director or a pastor will meet a young man, a young woman in the parish and say, you've got some really strong, faith. Where do you think that faith is leading you? Have you considered a religious vocation? Have you considered some sort of generous outreach to the church? Oh, Father, if you knew my past, you don't know the half of it. It's like, well, No, I don't. But God knows your past, and he's obviously still blessing you with a lot of faith. And even with your past, that can still bear a lot of fruit, as countless saints have proven. So no, there does not need to be this level of perfection. There needs to be a level of discipleship. One needs to actually be like practicing the faith and being nurtured in a daily union with God in prayer and the sacramental graces that come through life in the church. That has to be in place so that one is actually receptive to the promptings of the Holy Spirit. But we're not looking for perfect people.
So I'm bummed. I really thought you two were perfect.
Yeah, sure you did.
It's kind of a letdown.
Sure you did.
Now. Wow.
Yeah. Ask the seminarians.
Carmen knows.
Yeah, I did not have that assumption.
We'll talk about that more after the recording turns off. All right. Third fact or myth. Fact or myth? Only young men right out of high school can apply to be a seminarian.
That would be a myth. We might think that, and in the past, I think when families were at a certain level of practicing the faith, it's not that our families aren't now, but when young men were coming out of high school or maybe off the farm with a certain level of maturity and discernment and encouragement from maybe a lot of religious sisters who were at their grade schools growing up or in their high schools, I think men felt a freedom to say yes. So that's kind of been the assumption that most men discern right out of high school. That happens for some of us. I'd say for most in the church today, that doesn't happen. College, campus, Catholic student centers, Newman centers are wonderful places of discipleship and discernment that are happening right now. And many young men in the context of college as they're growing up also find that to be a place to discern. Also some men when they're in jobs and they're living their life in the world, the context of being connected to a parish, being connected to some kind of ministry in the church, that's what kind of stirs up in them a desire to proclaim the gospel, to celebrate the sacrament. So no, there's no like special spot where you miss this opportunity to discern God's call. The hope would be that discernment would start at a young age. The discernment would start, we wouldn't wait until we're in high school, we wouldn't wait until we're in college, but that discernment would be encouraged in families and in the home. That a vocation of the priesthood isn't something that's impossible because you have to be perfect, like we just said. It's not something that's just for people who are able to go to, private Catholic schools or something like that. No, it's Jesus calls men to be his priest, and is he calling me? That should be a question that every young man asks at many stages of their life. So no, many men who go to college already, there's even a kind of a track academically for them when they go to seminary to either receive a degree in philosophy or a certificate in philosophy, then to study the other years of seminary. Yeah.
What I think is so wonderful about your answer is just that reminder that all of our stories are written by God, but they aren't all the same. Mm-hmm. You know, the Catholic Church, I think, is so, what we sometimes overlook in the church is that, you know, it's a church of people who are living as disciples in a community. And the goal is for us to each have our own relationship with Christ so that we can use those promptings of the Holy Spirit as they, you know, come upon our hearts in our day to day. And I think it's really important for young people to know, you know, that is why we want you to learn how to pray, because you're the one who has to hear the call. We can't do that from the outside.
Mm-hmm.
So I really appreciate your explanation there, Father. Mm-hmm. So our next fact or myth: seminary life only includes prayer, sleep, and study, and there's absolutely no fun allowed.
Well, Father Shane's in charge. That's kind of
yeah. Do you allow fun, Father Shane?
No, we want lots of fun. I am the dean of students. We want healthy, holistic men joining the priesthood or a religious life, and they have to be well balanced. So what's their prayer time look like? What's their study time look like? What's their diet look like? What's their exercise look like? What's their friendships look like? All that has to be healthy and holistic and integrated if their humanity is moving well towards receiving the grace of holy orders or consecrated life. At the seminary, we've got 4 intramural soccer teams. They've got a basketball team. They played a great outdoor football game, with the old guys versus the young guys recently. There's guys who do musical numbers, improv nights, community nights where they're showing musical skills or theater skills. Some guys are into woodworking. Lots of guys are out playing disc golf. Some guys are out enjoying the city with museums and the symphony and whatnot. So there's all kinds of opportunities for men to kind of live a very holistic and balanced life, and that has to be part of any really healthy Christian existence.
I think there's like a sub-myth to this one that like seminary, because we might see old pictures or something, is kind of like a 19th century like British boarding school or something like that. when I was in college seminary, my friend gave a nice talk to some guys who were discerning on a come and see weekend. And he said, and this is college seminary, this is undergrad. He said, college seminary is a lot like your lives right now. And then he explained why. And he said, college seminary is a lot different than your lives right now, right? So what he focused on is you're not just locked away to go study and kind of live this rigorous schedule, but it's an opportunity to grow in humanity, to grow in relationship with God. So it's designed in such a way that the community life helps you grow, right? So there's all of the opportunities that there are in college of meeting new people and experiencing new things and living a normal life. You're not locked up. They let you out once in a while. But what's different, what's fundamentally different is that this is what was so exciting for me in my years of seminary is that everybody's facing Christ in the same way, dealing with their own growth as it comes up accordingly and with one another. And there's just something very beautiful about brothers all facing the same direction, facing Christ, hoping to serve the church with one another. So that actually brings about a really beautiful fraternity and camaraderie when you're in the seminary together.
Mm-hmm.
Not to mention those musical numbers. I'm intrigued, Father Crotty. Do you have a go-to musical number?
Yeah, so in the context of maybe like a special night where you do skits or something, kind of in-house situation, perhaps different guys might choose to do an improv skit or maybe a nice video, or maybe your friend convinces you to do a rap parody, and then somehow it gets put on YouTube, and then people find out about it and make fun of it.
I mean, how would someone happen to stumble upon such a rap video?
We'll put it on the show notes, Father.
That's
Okay, yep.
Lost that years ago.
Oh, no, I can find it. Trust me.
So, fact or myth, every man in seminarian formation will be ordained a priest.
Yeah, that's a huge myth. If we look at national statistics, men who come into the seminary at the age of 18, only 25% of them nationwide will actually end up getting ordained. And for those who have college degrees, it's a little bit higher. It's probably about 50 to 60% of them will get ordained. But that's a pretty large percentage of men who will use their formation, their intellectual growth, certainly their intimacy with the Lord in prayer, their enrichment by the good of the church through community living. They will take all that formation and go live healthy, holy lives. And for those men who discern out of seminary, and I'm someone who actually stepped out of seminary for a while and then came back, for those men who do step out, we can say, great, the seminary worked. If they go on to be healthy, holy husbands and fathers of children, excellent. Then the seminary helped them find their vocation, and the discernment process worked for them. But there isn't a guarantee that a man is going to get ordained if he enters the seminary on day one, just through an application phase. That gives him a lot of freedom to keep growing and keep listening to the voice of the Lord with the help of the church. But it also gives the church a lot of freedom to discern very carefully, is God really calling this man, and do we see a priestly vocation in him?
As I go around the diocese and promote and encourage discernment for the vocation of priesthood, a lot of the times people will, speak of a man entering seminary, which is a period of discernment, as he's going to study for the priesthood, right? Or he's going to become a priest, right? And I remember feeling that when I was a young man in college seminary, a lot of pressure, right? When I'd come back to the diocese, how many years do you have left? How many more years in seminary? How many more years? How many more years? When I was at the seminary, we didn't feel that pressure because it is an experience of discernment. So I think that's helpful. If a young woman enters a religious community, it's intentionally designed to be a period of discernment and understanding. Is this how God has made my heart? Is this how he's created me to love? Is this what he's calling me to? Or is he calling me elsewhere? And so guys we call it discerning out. They're not like dropping out or flunking out all the time. What's happening is that they're recognizing as they're growing in their own experience of prayer, as they're growing in their humanity, they realize, oh wait, God can love me and might be calling me somewhere else. And that's okay. And that's part of the process. That's, like you just said, Father Shane, so well. That means seminary worked, right? So yeah, we're not Navy recruiters or military recruiters, and that we're just like, sign your name here and we're shipping you off tomorrow, right? Those people who do that are very courageous and brave, right? But so is the experience of saying, I'm going to say yes to a period of discernment, trying to understand what God's calling me to.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad that you mentioned that, Father, because I was going to ask, what your thoughts were on, the language we ought to use in discernment. I think that can be really important, as it is intimidating as a young man to think that they're signing up for more than, a period of discernment. And so I'm really glad that you brought that up.
People often call me, so we have this kind of split role now that Father Shane's work within the Office of Vocations is to continue to accompany men within formation toward the priesthood. And people will say, oh, then you're just the recruiter, right? And that's not it, right? We don't just have this quota that we're trying to fill. We don't just have like a bunch of black collared shirts hanging that we just need to get on guys as soon as possible. But what we're actually doing is I'm accompanying men in their process of application and discernment, wherever that might start, wherever that they find themselves. Then that continues into the seminary, what's so helpful, and I remember when this was offered to us, you're not alone in that. The church then accompanies you and discerns with you, which that was so helpful for me. That even in difficult times where you feel like, man, I can't do this, the seminary formators, the men who are there to accompany your spiritual director, they can say, oh no, but we actually also see this gift of priesthood coming alive in you. So in difficult moments or in moments where it might feel too hard or you don't want to take another test or another year of seminary or something, there's a certain perseverance that comes with these father figures, these spiritual fathers who are saying, oh, no, we see this. We're also praying and discerning with you. So you're not left alone in this process of discernment.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and it's not a factory, just producing an end result. And I think we have to be very careful in the midst of pastoral planning, which is a difficult place to be in a diocese, is that it's not just about the numbers so that we can keep buildings open. It's about individual men who are baptized and, are discerning a call. And I think that we have to be very careful to treat our seminarians with that kind of respect and appreciation for their discernment, as well as holding them in prayer and not just counting down to, just more numbers of priests.
Exactly.
Right. So, fact or myth, our final one. If I attend a vocations office event such as Quo Vadis, Quest, Fireside, if Father Crotty even looks at me, if I talk to him, am I committed to study for the priesthood?
No,
are they going to lock me up and ship me off?
Yeah, that's a myth. I'm glad you mentioned these specific events that Father Shane started a few of them. We've kept them going. We've seen a great culture surrounding these events of young men who've been courageous enough, brave enough to attend some of these, which can be intimidating. What they find when they come is they often get to meet a number of our seminarians in those events and establish friendship with them, that they can say, oh, not just this idea of I'm thinking about priesthood by myself in my head, but there's brothers here for me. There's friends here for me. There's a community of men in the diocese who are also desiring to grow in faith and relationship with God, who are open to the possibility that God might be calling them to that. So no, these events are there to help connect guys, to help guys see that a life lived in relationship with Jesus and his church is not an isolating experience, but a life lived according to the Christian life is abundant. It's abundant life. And these are opportunities to connect with our seminarians, to connect with other young men in the diocese who are asking the same questions, to allow their questions to become my questions become their questions, and to help accompany somebody in that experience of discernment. Yeah. So definitely not myth. You come to one event, you are not locked in forever. But those can be a place of either sparking discernment, or they can also be a place of continuing and strengthening that experience.
Mm-hmm. And you've had some wonderful response to those. The pictures that over the years you've both sent going on these great trips that I wish I could go on, but they don't really want to marry an old lady there.
Hardly old. Give yourself some credit. Okay.
But you do have wonderful numbers and different ages and different backgrounds. So obviously those events are attractive to the men discerning a vocation. So thank you for having those, and we'll continue to help you promote those.
Thank you.
So let's say you are a person considering a vocation to the priesthood, or you have a son or a friend or a grandson that is considering a vocation to the priesthood. What should Carmen do? What should we do if we know someone?
Yeah, be normal, right? Just kind of like accosting them after a mass because you saw them praying and saying, you should be a priest, right? That's probably going to be weird and turn them off,
A little creepy.
I think when we think of, you're talking about Deacon Jake's thesis about how we understand our relationship with the natural world. Some of these great teachings of the church help us understand how to live the Christian life too. That idea of subsidiarity, that we want to take care of things at like the first and local level first, I think is so important, right? So the relationship between a young man or anybody and their pastor is the primary experience, the first experience people have within the church, right? So that a young man would actually have a relationship with the priest he's closest to, with his pastor, the one he hopefully serves Mass for if he's a young man, that would be the first connection, right? The work of vocations director didn't really used to be that. I mean, a lot of the times, a long time ago, the vocation director was kind of the paperwork guy, and the pastor was really the vocations director. And that's the hope, that each pastor is the vocations director of his own parish, of having this ability, that conversation. So I'd say, first, establishing a relationship with the pastor, which is helpful. And then if he happens to be at one of our Catholic schools or in one of our faith formation programs, to make that next connection, right? With the chaplain, if they have one there, with the campus minister, with the director of faith formation, or somebody in the parish who can begin to accompany this young man. The like kind of call to the vocation director can kind of be a big step for some guys, right? But that's why those relationships, helping direct guys to some of these events that we mentioned before, that's the helpful, kind of gentle way to encourage young men to the priesthood.
And we can put in the show notes contact information if someone's reading that.
Sure.
So a young man relationship with their pastor, and hopefully that fosters that. So what can the laity do? The laity's always asking, what can we do to support the men in formation, the men considering it? What can laity do to support the Office of Vocations for both of you?
I think anything that the laity can do just to help young people learn how to pray would be massive. If young people don't have an established relationship with the Lord, it's going to be very difficult for them to say, oh, I can know his voice and actually follow his will, because they've never even taken time to listen for his voice, right? Just the ease by which discernment comes about when you know a young person is actually moving with Jesus. They're stopping in the chapel. They're taking time for prayer, and they're noticing that there's traction in a certain idea keeps coming back. It's resting on their heart, and they really feel confident, oh, there's something from the Lord here. I'm feeling a draw. I'm feeling an invitation. It's giving a sense of consolation. And even if I don't know how it's going to pan out, and even if I have my own insecurities about whether or not I'm actually qualified for that role, there is still a movement to say, oh, I can trust him because I know him, and there's an intimacy with the Lord. So anything with youth ministry, campus ministry, parish catechesis events that don't just try and teach people what to believe, but actually to know him, that is a foundation that I think would be really great for Father Crotty. And then if a young person approaches him as the vocation director and says, I'm thinking about a religious vocation, I'm thinking about the priesthood, I'm thinking about the diaconate, whatever, and Father can say, oh, what's Jesus been putting on your heart? Well, let me tell you, and this is what's been going on in prayer. That is so much easier than someone coming up and saying, well, I think your vestments are kind of pretty, so I want to wear those. Okay, no, we're not interested in you. Okay, we're interested in you kind of walking with Jesus. We're not interested in this being a personal display about your own self.
Yeah, and I'd like to even just back it up, even in like the formation of a young person. I know it's not popular, but to actually encourage children, grandchildren, people within our own families to consider that. And what does that look like, right? Does that mean you just like sit your son down and you're like, you need to consider being a priest, you need to think about this? I think it's so much more organic than that, that just as normal as it would be to talk about what good marriage looks like, what family life looks like, what having children looks like, and how good and exciting that can be, and leading by example, so too to point to the life of the priest as a normal part of the church. One of our priests in the diocese, Father Zach Jones, often talks about, this is a weird kind of nerdy thing to say, but Lord of the Rings, there's like these guys that there's like kind of dug out of the ground and pulled out. And that could be the thought of the priest, that like the priests are just these guys who just kind of fell out of the sky or something. Like where do these guys come from? We all came from families. We all came from parishes. We all came from communities that either explicitly or implicitly we were encouraged in some way to consider the priesthood. So we wonder, like, how do high school kids like figure out what they want to do at the end of high school, and they just figure out where they want to go to college? They probably know somebody in that field, maybe they're family members, or they've seen somebody, right? Why do kids want to be physical therapists? They probably receive some wonderful help from a physical therapist, right? They want to be a nurse because they've seen somebody in their life do that. So I think this same witness of the Christian life that shows that this is a life worth living, this is a life worth pursuing. The same with the vocation of the priesthood that can seem so obscure sometimes, that you would perhaps invite the priest over to your house once in a while, right, with children, or that you would just experience life lived in the context of the church and the parish, that it's normal to consider that. a little wordy, but I think that's helpful.
It is. Thank you.
That's okay.
Well, thank you to both Father Shane Deman and Father Travis Crotty for coming in this very windy day and sharing with us so much wisdom and so much knowledge and helping us dispel those myths that I know that we've all heard as we discuss vocations, because that is definitely something that's on all of our radars as we desire the Eucharist and desire life with the sacraments. We know that it's so important that our priests play such an important role in that, and God will always provide. So thank you so much for your time, for joining us, and thank you to all of our listeners for following Illuminating Catholics. You don't want to miss a single podcast, as we have some more great topics and guests on the schedule, because there's always something to learn about the faith.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Illuminating Catholics, shedding light to understand the modern church. Follow us for more episodes on topics of the Catholic faith. For more diocesan news, visit lumenmedia.org.